The story of Yusuf and Zulekha takes place in the 12th chapter of the Quran, titled Yusuf. The story plays a primary role within the chapter and begins after Yusuf, son of Yaqub ibn Ishaq ibn Ibrahim, is abandoned and subsequently sold to an Egyptian royal guard. After reaching maturity, Yusuf becomes so beautiful that his master's wife, later called Zulekha in the Islamic tradition, falls in love with him. Blinded by her desire, she locks him in a room with her and attempts to seduce him. Through his great wisdom and power, Yusuf resists her and turns around to open the door. Upset, Zulekha attempts to stop him, and in the process, rips the back of his shirt. At this moment, Zulekha's husband, the lord of the house, and Yusuf's master catches Zulekha and Yusuf struggling at the door and calls for an explanation. For deflecting the blame, Zulekha tells her husband that Yusuf attempted to seduce her. 5. Yusuf contradicts this and tells the Lord that Zulekha wanted to seduce him. Unsure who is guilty, the servant of the household tells the Lord that the placement of the rip on Yusuf's shirt will tell the truth about what happened. According to the servant, if Yusuf's shirt was ripped at the front, he must have been going towards Zulekha, attempting to seduce her. On the other hand, if Yusuf's shirt was ripped from the back, he was trying to get away from Zulekha, therefore Zulekha was guilty. 8. After examining Yusuf's shirt and seeing the rip on the back, Yusuf's master determines his wife is the guilty party, and angrily tells her to ask forgiveness for her sin. Yusuf and Zulekha. Yusuf pursued by Potiphar's wife, miniature by Bezod, 1488. Later, Zulekha overhears a group of women speaking about the incident, verbally shaming Zulekha for what she did. Zulekha, angered by this, gives each woman a knife and calls for Yusuf. Upon his arrival, the women cut themselves with their knives, shocked by his beauty. Zulekha, boosted by proving to the women that any woman would fall for Yusuf, proudly claims that Yusuf must accept her advances, or he will be imprisoned. Disturbed by Zulekha's claim, Yusuf prays to Allah, begging Allah to make them imprison him, as Yusuf would rather go to jail than do the bidding of Zulekha and the other women. 14. Allah, listening to Yusuf's request, makes the chief in power believe Yusuf should go to prison for some time, and so Yusuf does. In poetry, 𝐂𝐤𝐤, in 1483 AD, the renowned poet 𝐂𝐤𝐤 wrote his interpretation of the allegorical romance and religious texts of Yusuf and Zulekha. It became a classical example and the most famous version of Sufi interpretation of Quranic narrative material. 𝐂𝐤𝐤's example shows how a religious community takes a story from a sacred text and appropriates it in a religious socio-cultural setting that is different from the original version. Therefore, it is known as a masterpiece of Sufi mystical poetry. 𝐂𝐤𝐤 opens the poem with a prayer. In the narrative, Yusuf is an incredibly handsome young man. Due to his beauty, he became a victim of his brother's jealousy because Yusuf was so beautiful he had an influence on everyone that met him. The brothers take him to be sold to the inner slave market in Egypt. 𝐂𝐤𝐤 shows that Yusuf's brother's greed is not how to live a Sufi life. Yusuf is put up for sale and astounds everyone with his beauty. This causes a commotion in the market and the crowd starts bidding for him. Zulekha, the rich and beautiful wife of Potiphar, sees him and is struck by Yusuf's beauty. She outbids everyone and buys him. 4 years, Zulekha suppressed her desire for Yusuf until she could not resist it any longer. She ends up attempting to seduce Yusuf. When Potiphar found out, he sent Yusuf to prison, causing Zulekha to live with extreme guilt. 20. One day while in prison, Yusuf was able to interpret the Pharaoh's dream, and thus, the Pharaoh made Yusuf chief of all his treasures. 21. Because of this, Yusuf was able to meet with Zulekha. He saw that she still had love for him and was miserable. He took her in her arms and prayed to God. The prayer and the love Yusuf and Zulekha had for each other attracted a blessing from God, restoring youth and beauty to Zulekha. They got married and lived happily. What the audience learns from this story is that God's beauty appears in many forms and that Zulekha's pursuit of love from Yusuf is, in fact, the love and pursuit of God. 23. In 𝐂𝐤𝐤's version, Zulekha is the main character and even more important thematically and narratively than Yusuf. Yusuf, on the other hand, is a two-dimensional character. Another difference in 𝐂𝐤𝐤's version is that the overwhelming majority of the story is unrelated to the Quran. Finally, 𝐂𝐤𝐤 claims that his inspiration. 𝐂𝐤𝐤 claims that his inspiration to write this version of the story comes from love, Yusuf in Zulekha's party. Painting in Taqdeer Moven Oil Mok, Kermanshah, Iran, Shah Muhammad Saga, main article, Yusuf Zulekha.Islam.
Continued to spread, authors across Asia resonated with the story of Yusuf and Zulekha. Jami's adaptation of the famous tale served as the model for many readers. Bengali author Shah Muhammad Sagir also published his own reinterpretation. Though little information is available about his life and the sources from which he drew, it is assumed to have been written between 1389 and 1429. Through this work, he set the precedent for romance in Bengali literature. One of the unique attributes of Sagir's version is the change of setting, as his poem takes place in Bengal. A prime example of syncretism, it blends elements of Hindu culture with the classic Islamic tale, which in turn encourages readers to coexist with other faiths. It is also testament to Islamic influence on the Indian
subcontinent. It is known for its detailed descriptions of Yusuf and Zulekha's physical beauty, and begins with the two protagonists' childhoods, which then unravels into a tale full of passion and pursuit. 26. Hazrat Yusuf Zulekha also keeps in touch with the Islamic values found in the original story and echoes the Sufi belief that to love on earth is to love Allah. Although Hazrat intended his poem not to be read as a translation of the Quranic version nor as sourced from the Persians before him, he did borrow Persian linguistic traditions in order to write it. 27. Following the introduction of Hazrat's poem, other Bengali writers throughout the centuries took inspiration and created their own versions of Yusuf and Zulekha, including Abdul Hakim and Shah Garabala. Hakim took his inspiration directly from Jami, while Garabala chose to write something more unique. Other versions, folio 51, are from Abastan of Sadi, Yusuf and Zulekha. There also exists a Punjabi Kiss version of Yusuf and Zulekha, composed by Hafiz Bakhada, that contains around 1,200 pairs of rhyming verses. 29. He, too, was inspired by Jami, while incorporating his own stylistic choices. In Bakhada's version, Yusuf is reunited with his father, Yaqub, at the end. 30. This is an example of a written kissa, or a Punjabi style of storytelling that emphasizes folkloric tradition. Bakhada's rendition was not published until the 19th century, and by then it was considered too antiquated for mainstream reading. 31. In fact, many versions of Yusuf and Zulekha have been lost to time. However, the popularity of the story can be used to measure the impact of Persianization on South Asia. This is evident in Maulvi Abd al-Hakim's interpretation of Yusuf and Zulekha, which directly imitates Jami as well as other features of the Persian language. Nevertheless, these stories contributed to the development of the Kissa as a genre based on Jami's Persian version. Munshi Sadiq Ali also wrote this story as a poetic style puthi in the Silhiti Nagari script, which he titled Mahabbatnama. A version by Mahmud Kirimli from 13th century is regarded as the first literary work written in the Crimean Tatar language. Another writer who retold the story is Mahmud Gami in Kashmiri. In art, the international recognition of the tale of Yusuf and Zulekha resulted in many artistic
renditions of the poem. Substantial periods of conquest and dissolution of Islam throughout Asia and North Africa led to a flurry of diverse artistic interpretations of Yusuf and Zulekha. Central Asia, within one of the wealthiest trading centers along the Silk Road in Bukhara, Uzbekistan, the manuscript of Bustan of Sari would be found. The status of Bukhara as a wealthy Islamic trading hub led to a flourishing of art and culture in the city. From such an economic boom, the Bustan of Sari created an Ag-Dweep portrays many scenes from the poems of Yusuf and Zulekha. In a frequently reproduced scene, Yusuf leaves the home of Zulekha after refusing her romantic advances. The scene demonstrated visually a prominent theme from the poem in which we see Yusuf's powerful faith in God
overcome his own physical desires. As depicted in the artwork, the locked doors unexpectedly spring open, offering Yusuf a path from Zulekha's home. In crafting this piece, the materials used fall in line with the conventional methods used at the time and were a mixture of oil paints, gold, and watercolors. Persia. Zulekha in the company of her maids by Muhammad Murak. From Persia we see what is considered to be, by some experts, the most recognized illustration of Jami's poem Yusuf and Zulekha. The artist Kamal al-Din Behzad, under the direction of Sultan Hussein Baikara of the Timurid Empire, constructed a manuscript illustrating the tale of Yusuf and Zulekha. Behzad has often been credited with initiating a high point of Islamic miniature painting, his artistic style. of blending the traditional geometric shape with open spaces to create a central view of his characters was a new idea evident in many of his works. 35. One of Hazrat's most notable works had been his interpretation of the seduction of Yusuf, where his distinctive style of painting is on display. 36. The painting depicts dynamic movement, with Yusuf and Zulekha both painted while in motion amidst a backdrop of a stretched-out flat background to bring attention to the characters central to the painting. Kashmir. In a work originating from the Kashmir region of India, we see how under the Islamic Mughal Empire the renowned poem of Yusuf and Zulekha continued to flourish in art. 37. The continued interest in illustrating the renowned tale of Yusuf and Zulekha can be found in a manuscript from Muhammad Murak dating back to the year 1776. The manuscript offers over 30 paintings styling different scenes from Jami's poem of Yusuf and Zulekha. 38. Within the manuscript, the unique style of the Mughal painting that had combined Indian and Persian artistic style is demonstrated. 39. There is more emphasis upon realism in Mughal painting, and this focus may be seen within Murak's manuscript. The illustration of Zulekha and her maids offers the viewer a detail-oriented scope into the author's imagining of the tale. The historically accurate dress and photorealistic design differ from prior interpretations of the tale which had been more fantastical in nature.